Okay, I will do the create, yeah.
Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. We will be starting in a couple of minutes. We'll just wait until most people have come in through the lobby.
That's okay.
Hi, Chloe. Thanks for joining as well. I hope you can hear us okay. Great. Mirella, do you want to start?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks also for organizing all this. Welcome to everybody. I know from different parts of the world, so I would say good morning, good evening, or even good night. We know that one of the presenters is also in the middle of his night. So thank you all for joining this webinar that will discuss the recently launched World Drug Report 2023. As you know, this report was presented on 26th of June on the World Drug Day, and we devote this session for you stakeholders to give this additional opportunity to look at it and understand better and have an opportunity to reflect on it. Before I go into also introducing even myself, I would like to just say a few housekeeping issues. I want to remind all of you that the webinar is recorded and that the session is being interpreted, and you can choose to listen either to in original, so English, or in Spanish, French, or Russian by using the drop-down menu at the bottom of the screen entitled Interpretation. Also, you can see some instruction in the chat box, and let's leave the chat box for either instruction from our end or just some greetings. Later on, if you have any question, please put them in the question answer box. So my name is Mirella Dumafrai. I have the privilege to lead the civil society unit in UNODC. This unit is under the direct report directly to the division, to the director of the Division for Policy Analysis and Public Affairs. And we are like the main entry point for civil society engagement with UNODC. We facilitate civil society participation in different intergovernmental meetings, including the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. We also provide training and workshop to build the capacity of civil society in view to support member states in the implementation of their commitments on drug and crime. We also want to make sure that the voice of the most vulnerable is heard at international fora, and they are very often represented by civil society. This event is co-organized with the Vienna NGO Committee on Drugs, the main NGO umbrella organization with whom we work when it comes to drug-related matter. And obviously by the UNODC Research and Analysis branch that produced the report. You will later hear of Chloe, who is the chief of the UNODC Drug Research Section, but also Thomas Pichment, who is one of the author of this report, and they will both present the finding. I know that there was a great interest because we had more than 700 registration. Probably we don't reach this number so far in terms of participation, but we are at, I see, over 200 participants, which is very good. And it shows the interest in really what remains UNODC most important flip chart report, I would say, because it gives really, it's unique and it gives all the information to allow you also NGOs to better understand the world drug situation and to see how it impacts your life and your work. So this is really a great opportunity for you, and I would not like to take more of the time and would like also to say that after after you hear the presentation from Chloe and Thomas, there will be two civil society experts who will present also their insight and perspective. One insight from Australia on the prevention and treatment, and one from a youth perspective on drug crime in the Amazon basin. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the floor to Matej Kosir, who is the chair of the Vienna NGO Committee on Drugs. He was elected at the last CND, so very freshly chair, and it's his first webinar on the World Drug Report. So Matej, the floor is with you, and he will also moderate the rest of the session.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you also for your kind words and congratulations. Okay, on behalf of Vienna NGO Committee on Drugs, I would like to thank you all for registering first and attending this webinar. As far as I know as well, we have a record number of registrations and attendees this year. It's definitely our great pleasure to organize this traditional webinar on this year's World Drug Report, which will be presented by UNODC experts and following also by inputs from civil society on how they use the report in their work. And we have John and Rebecca with us today to present the inputs from civil society. There will also be plenty of time for your questions and answers as well. As you heard already, please use questions and answers tool, because it will be very difficult to search for your comments and answers in chat. But of course, you can use chat for other communications as well. And first of all, congratulations to Ms. Angela May and her team for delivering this latest World Drug Report. Especially, I want to thank Chloe and Thomas for being here with us and presenting the report. It's a massive undertaking, and it remains the main tool that we have for understanding and analyzing the world drug situation. Last issue, before we start, I would like to promote, especially among our members and civil society organizations, the NGO Marketplace, which we wish you to use in any other communication with us and with other civil society organizations. Just search the NGO marketplace and you will find it very useful for you to connect with many NGOs and members of the Vienna NGO Committee on Drugs around the globe. So thank you very much, and let us start with presentation of the World Drug Report. Ms. Chloe Carpentier and Mr. Thomas Pitchman are with us today from UNODC Drugs Research Section, and they will present the main findings of the World Drug Report 2023, followed, as I said already, by inputs from civil society organizations. So Chloe and Thomas, the screen is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matesh, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Also, good night for those who are in the middle of the night, I understand. So I will start. So I'm the chief of the regular section, and I'm also overseeing, coordinating the World Drug Report. I will start with a sort of overview of some of the main findings, and then Thomas will follow up with some regional insights for some of you who comes from different sub-regions and regions. I will try to share my screen first. So, yeah. So what do you see? Do you see the full screen or not?
Not yet. We see PowerPoint slide. Yes.
And now, what do you see? No, not yet. Do you see it?
Now we see it.
Okay. Okay. So first slide. Okay, so we estimate that we have about 300 million of people who have been using drugs in the last year. This is 23% more than a decade ago, and this is due both to an increase in population, but also an increase in drug use. And I think this is important to say. There's also more people with drug use disorders than 10 years ago. In fact, it's nearly 50% more. So this is quite a big increase. And as in the past, cannabis is the drug that is the most used, but in terms of harm and the drugs that leads to most drug use disorders, it's really opioid continue to be the leading drug and the leading cause of overdose deaths. Young people continue to be more vulnerable to drug use than adults. There is more users of drugs among young people than among adults. And we estimate that more than 13 million people aged 15, 16 years old are users of cannabis. So it's quite a big number. In sub-region, we see that there is a major proportion of people in drug treatment which are under 25. For example, in South America, it's 52% of those in drug treatment are under 25. So it's quite a big proportion. In some region, it's due to the age pyramid of the region, I would say, or sub-region. The population may be very young. In others, it's not the case. It's because drug users are mostly young in these countries or sub-regions. On the front of people who inject drugs, we estimate that there were 13.2 million in our last estimate for 2021. This is 2 million more than the previous estimate. Because of new estimates in some major countries, for example, United States, but not only, in other countries too. So it's quite a big jump, I would say. Hepatitis C remains the main cause of concern in people who inject drugs, is responsible for a lot of harm. And for the first time, we have looked at men and women in people who inject drugs, and also in people who inject drugs that are living with HIV. Without distinguishing by sex, half of the people who inject drugs are living with hepatitis C, and about 1/8 are living with HIV. But men are 5 times more likely to inject drugs than women. But once we look at those who inject drugs, women are more likely to live with HIV than men. For a number of reasons. Now, on the front of access to control drugs for medical purposes, for medical consumption, inequalities persist. There has been an increase in the availability of these pharmaceutical drugs for medical consumption in low and middle income countries, but there are still extremely low levels in some countries in Africa and in Asia. And we estimate that about a bit more than 80% of the global population is living in countries without adequate access to control medicines for pain medication. Now, during the COVID, it's very interesting. So most of the many countries reported a decline in the number of people in drug treatment because of the reduction of movement and etc. But at the same time, the period was really a good period for innovation, I would say, in drug services. So in some countries, in all regions, there has been innovation in terms of telemedicine, take-home dosages, take-home also material for injection, etc. I mean, clean material, and to increase the access to these drug services. And we have looked at the studies, and here you see the map. There are different types of studies in all regions of the world. And it seems that the early evaluations of these studies is rather positive. So it has really increased access for some population groups, not for all of them. There's been also some challenges, but now the issue is to look at the final results of this outcome evaluation, and also to see whether these types of this new innovation will be mainstream in terms of drug services now that we are in the post-COVID period. In terms of barriers to treatments, they seem to persist. Only 1 in 5 people with drug use disorders is in treatment. Women are underrepresented in drug treatment, and this is mostly the case for amphetamine. We see that nearly, 45% of those who use amphetamines are women, but only 27% are in treatment. We devoted this year chapter, now I'm moving from health issues to more perhaps supply issues, and not only also impact on people. We have devoted this year chapter on drug crimes and other type of criminality in a specific region, which is the Amazon basin. And we wanted to look at the convergence of this type of different types of crime and the impact on the environment, but also on the local communities. And what is clear is that there are parts of the Amazon basin which are really at the intersection of multiple forms of organized crime that are accelerating the environmental devastation, with implications for the security and the safety of those who live there, but also their health and their well-being. One main factor is what we call narco-deforestation. So I will explain. So per se, the cultivation of coca is not driving deforestation in the Amazon or even in outside of the Amazon. But what is driving mainly is driving in terms of the drug input, I would say, is what we call narco-deforestation. And this is basically the investment of the drug profit. So here we are talking about the cocaine trade, but also there is a lot of cannabis trafficking also in the region. So these drug profits are being reinvested into illicit logging, into illicit gold mining, into cattle ranching, but also land grabbing, etc. And this is accelerating the deforestation that is also already happening with these other processes and other criminal activities. And we see that there is I would say a superposition of different activities with the same actors, sometimes many places actually, that are involved in this type of activities, with a lot of, a lot of consequences, negative for local population and indigenous populations too. Now, on the front of cocaine, we highlight a prolonged surge in both the supply and the demand of cocaine, with record highs in cultivation and in production, with use that has been increasing quite steadily over the last decade or more. We see a diversification of criminal actors along the supply chain of cocaine, from source countries in Latin America to destination markets in South America, but also in North America and in West Europe, which has become a very large market now in the last decade. More efficient supply chains, a lot of new trafficking hubs, transit points. For example, The cocaine that is reaching Western Europe is now transiting more and more by West Africa, the coast of West Africa, and also the Gulf of Guinea. This was the case in the years 2005, 6, 9, I would say, but then it went down. And now we see a resurgence since 2019. There are really big seizures that are happening there. There's also trafficking for the Sahel, trafficking in North Africa. Southeast Europe is also used as a transit point for Turkey, but not only Bulgaria, Greece, towards the Western European markets. And there is also trafficking that is also new in the last few years in Southeast and East Asia, in Hong Kong, in Japan. We see an increase in seizures there. So trafficking is moving eastwards. And with all of this, I mean, there is always the worry that there is some spillover, because where there is transit, there is some drug, I mean, this is cocaine in that instance, that stays. Also, some of the criminals that are hired to transport the drug may be paid in nature in drugs, and then they will, of course, distribute it where they are paid, and it may be in transit countries. So there is always this worry. So there is a potential for expansion even further of the cocaine market. Now, as regards methamphetamine, so the largest market continue to be in North America and in East and Southeast Asia. They account for more than 90% of the seizures, but they're stabilizing, it seems, at quite a high level. But where we see a big expansion is in emerging markets. So the emerging markets of Southwest Asia, especially around Afghanistan, where manufacture seems to be booming. In South Asia, which is in between Myanmar, a lot of manufacture, and also Afghanistan, in Africa, and in Southeastern Europe. So here too, it seems that there is an expansion of the non-traditional markets, so these emerging markets. Captagon continues to flourish in the Near and the Middle East. Seizures have reached a new high in 2021 in the region. The main departing countries continue to be in the Levant, and the main destination is in the Gulf, the countries in the Gulf. It can reach the Gulf countries directly or also indirectly through South Europe. Now, what we see is also new destination, and you see that on a map with these arrows which are in dotted lines. This is new. So it seems that there are new destinations in North Africa and also in West Africa. This is something we need to check, and we need to confirm with data in following years. But something I wanted to mention also is that this region is not only characterized by Captagon, and it seems that there would be a market for methamphetamine that would be developing in this region too. And this is quite recent, so it's also alarming. Afghanistan, I've mentioned Afghanistan for methamphetamine. So Afghanistan is mostly known still for opium production. It accounts for 80% of the global opium production in 2022. But as you may know, there was a ban by the de facto Taliban government in 2022 about the production and trafficking of drugs in the country. And it seems that it may reverse the trend. So the trend was increasing, but it seems it may reverse. We will get the new data in the fall this year. So I think October, November, we will know more. Now, the country is characterized also by methamphetamine manufacture. This is quite recent. And there is a bit the concern here that if there is a decrease in the manufacture of opium, whether it will be replaced by manufacture of methamphetamine. Of course, they are not the same products, but they are two illicit economies. And this is a bit the worry we have here. There is a lot of the Afghan methamphetamine that is now being exported in many countries of the world and different regions. You see here the infographic on the right. We looked this year again at the very complex relationship between drugs and conflict. As we have said last year, illicit drug economies can flourish in situation of conflict, and in turn, this can prolong and fuel conflict. So we have released earlier this year a study on Haiti, looking at cannabis, cocaine, and how violence is also fueling all of this. We have in the World Drug Report this year looked at the Sahel, the fact that non-state armed group may also be linked to drug trafficking, but not always. And we have looked also at Ukraine. We have continued. So what is clear that in Ukraine, cocaine and heroin trafficking routes have been disrupted since the beginning of the armed conflict. But there is a potential extension for the manufacture and the trafficking of synthetic drugs. Before the war, the main synthetic drug that was, the one that was manufactured in Ukraine was amphetamine. And now around the countries, neighboring countries in the vicinity, there are other drugs that are being trafficked, other synthetic drugs. So it's possible that the country is being used by criminals to manufacture other synthetic drugs than amphetamine or even amphetamine. Now we have devoted this year a special chapter to look at how synthetic drugs in general are shifting the drug markets and the drug supply chains. I think, and starting with manufacture and the trafficking of synthetic drugs, I think was characteristic as opposed to plant-based drugs is that to manufacture them, you only need cheap chemical inputs that are very easily sourced. The structure of the labo is very different. You see here on the infographics that you don't need a lot of low-skilled farmers. You just need a few chemists with the right formulas, and basically the potential to scale up the manufacture is much higher. So by adding a chemist, you have much more than if you had a farmer cultivator for plant-based drugs. The supply chain are shorter. The operational costs are lower also, and the detection is also lower because usually, they're very mobile in terms of where the manufacture can happen, and it's in the interest of the criminals that it occurs close to major markets, so there is less distance to be less distance for the transport of the drugs and less opportunity for detection. That said, we see that manufacture and also trafficking is increasing, also in low and middle income countries, and not only in countries where there is a weak rule of law. So it's not, I would say, it's not exactly as for the plant-based drugs. Labs that are dismantled for synthetic drugs have been increasingly reported to us and in all regions. So this brings a lot of challenges for law enforcement in terms of detection, and also for users, because in many cases users don't always know what they are taking, and this may lead to a lot of risks in terms of health and harmful consequences. The opioid crisis continues, a dual opioid crisis with the fentanyl issue in North America, which is driven by unprecedented number of deaths. And in North and West and Central Africa, and the Near Middle East and Southwest Asia, this is the crisis that is linked to the non-medical use of tramadol and the trafficking of sort of falsified, I would say, tramadol in doses which are much higher than the tramadol that is used in a medical context. But we see also some misuse of the drug in other regions too. So this is also something important. The markets in terms of drugs is also expanding on other fronts. And here I wanted to mention three perhaps different trends that we are seeing. The first is NPS, the new psychoactive substances. So the number of these substances had been stabilizing on the market at global level at around 500 for a few years. And now in 2021, there is an increase again. So it seems that we registered 618 different NPS on the market at global level in 2021, and 87 of them were new. They had never been reported before in any country. So innovation is still going on there. We also looked at ketamine this year. So ketamine is a substance that is not under international control, but it may be controlled in some member states. And it has been there for quite some time in East and Southeast Asia. But now what we see recently in the last few years is really a diversification and an expansion of both the manufacture and the trafficking of ketamine. Is illicit ketamine. It's not the ketamine that is used in veterinary medicine or in human medicine. We are speaking here about illicitly produced ketamine. So it's expanding and diversifying beyond just a few countries in East and Southeast Asia, and now in the region too. So there are some countries in the region that before were not associated with the manufacture of ketamine. I'm thinking about Cambodia now, the big labs that were seized not long ago, manufacturing ketamine. And there is also ketamine reaching the region where there is a sort of market base that is produced, for example, in Germany or in other countries, but outside the region. So it's something a bit new. And that what we see too is that the appearance on the market in different places in the world, this is interesting, of new drug combinations. So there is what is called 2C or 2CB. This is, for example, in South America and also in North America and in Western Europe, which phonetically, it seems that we are talking about the NPS, which now has been controlled to CB, but it's not the case. This is a combination of different drugs. There is also K powdered milk or happy water. This is most in East and Southeast Asia. It may contain ketamine, but not always, and different things. There has been deaths even recorded in Thailand. So this is a challenge for users because, of course, they don't know what they are taking, and there are, as I say, there are some deaths that have been the result of this intakes of this combination. So the market continues to expand and to innovate. We have also dedicated a chapter this year to the online supply of drugs, which we argue may be changing. So there are different platforms that make the drug supply, I would say, more varied in terms of user groups. So some product can be found on the clear web, others on the dark web, on the deep web, sorry, which is basically all that is not accessible through public pages. And then the dark web. So the dark web is a small part of the deep web and can be accessed only with specific tools. Now, the drug markets on the dark web still account for a very small share of all of overall drug transactions. They continue to be very volatile, and they come and go. And you see here the graph down. They come and go depending, basically as a function of law enforcement activities or exit scams, different factors. But what the data seem to indicate is that these markets may become increasingly specialized, and they may also become more targeting drug distributors than retailers and end users, I would say. So as opposed to the past. And at the same time, it seems that social media platforms, and there may be many, would be increasingly used for end user drug transaction, for retail drug transaction, because of their popularity in general, and not only for drugs, I would say, and because of the direct access by drug buyers, by drug users. Now, this year, we looked into two issues in relation to drug regulations, I would say. The first one is on the medical cannabis market and the regulations of the medical cannabis. And so in last year, we looked at how many countries have allowed the medical use of cannabis or cannabis preparations in a medical context. There were 64, and nearly more than half of them were allowing the use of what we call cannabis-based products. So cannabis-based products are not the pharmaceutical cannabis product like Epidiolex or this type of thing, or Sativex, which have gone through a market authorization, clinical trials, and all of this. No, like any other pharmaceutical product. Here we are talking about a range of products that may take different forms and have been regulated in different ways that varies a lot in terms of the products that are available in the countries. In some cases they are standardized, in others they are not. In terms of patient accessibility, For some, there is need for prescription, for others not, etc. And in terms of supply mechanisms. And we have looked at that with a view to look at the differing public health outcomes, because depending on the types of system and in place, there may be a risk of, I would say, porosity with the non-medical market for cannabis, whereas in others, it may be easier to contain the use to the medical market, I would say. And then the last issue we looked at, which is a bit new, is what's happening in the domain of psychedelics. So psychedelics are a number of products. They are the classic psychedelics, and there are others a bit less classics, like ketamine, for example. In the classic, you have the LSD and others. And basically what we see is that there is an unprecedented development in terms of the research or science, I would say, in looking at the potential of using psychedelic in a medical context for treating some mental health conditions. And it's very promising. Now, at the date of today, there are more than 400 clinical trials in the world about the use of psychedelics. It's very promising for using them for depression, for some anxiety disorders, also for drugs, substance use disorders, in some cases, alcohol in particular, but also cocaine, and PTSD also. And so some of the clinical trials are already quite advanced. They are the third, we call that the third stage. And that means it's just before it can go to the market, basically. So when I say promising, it's quite promising. And what the research shows is that these drugs wouldn't be prescribed just as a one-off or as every day or something like that. It will have to be coupled with psychotherapy. So this is something very important. They're supervised session, basically, and at least 2 or 3 sessions, one before, one during the experience and using the drug, and then one after to debrief. So this is on the research side. At the same time, we see that the regulatory landscape is changing very rapidly in some countries. In the United States, there has been sort of regulation of some of these drugs on the market, and without having the science already, I would say, finalized. So there is no guidelines about how to take these drugs, the supervision, medical supervision, etc. At the same time, there is a growing commercial interest that is, of course, pushing for development of the market. So the worry and the concern that we are raising in the chapter is about this risk of unsupervised self-medication, because the regulation is going faster than the science, because there is a push from the commercial interest, and because what the science is showing is that it needs to be coupled with psychotherapy, and this is expensive, and in some countries may not be, reimbursed or etc. So there is this concern about unregulated practice that may lead to some abuse or misuse. And my last slide is to advertise a bit about a new component of the World Drug Report this year, which we call the online segments. So basically this year, the World Drug Report in its printed version, or you will find it on the web as a PDF, is rather short. I think it's half the size of last year, but last year was quite big. So it should be an improvement for the readers. But at the same time, we've moved online in the form of interactive key findings and graphs and maps, etc. The analysis on trends and latest estimates, etc., on supply and demand on different drugs. And then this is searchable also, you can see that. And we have, I think, 95 key findings. So there are 95 sort of topical analysis. This is analysis where you can find the messages, and at the same time you can find the supporting evidence in the forms of graphs or maps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chloe, for this excellent presentation. I especially like the last part because there are many people around the world not really keen to read the whole report, but these key messages, key findings, the summary of the report is really valuable, and especially for policy and decision makers, particularly. So please, thank you very much, and let's proceed with Thomas. So Thomas, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Or do you can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen and we can hear you.
Good, perfect. Yeah. So I'm basically on the last online segment. I'm going to inform you about some of the key findings over there. So, okay, as usual, we have the prevalence rates, and the prevalence rates show us most is cannabis, followed by the opioids, followed by the amphetamines, cocaine, and ecstasy. In terms of the overall, Chloe already mentioned, 5.8% of the global population, close to 300 million people, have used drugs, of which some 40 million people are really people with drug use disorders, 4.77% of the global population, age 15 and 64. In terms of trends and patterns, this is in terms of millions, most of the cannabis, the opioids, amphetamines, cocaine, ecstasy. In terms of Chloe mentioned distribution, male and female. For most categories, we see that there are more males than females. This is nothing new, but it changes and differs quite significantly depending on the specific drugs. We won't go into these details. Next one is here. We looked also onto people who inject drugs. And here we see particularly high levels of injecting drugs continue to be in Eastern Europe. Then when it comes to people who actually live with HIV/AIDS, among injecting drug users, we have high levels in Southwest Asia, and again, high levels in Eastern Europe, and particularly in Eastern Europe, it's the biggest numbers worldwide of people injecting drugs who have to live with HIV/AIDS. We have also the numbers for hepatitis B, and then the numbers for hepatitis C. Hepatitis C distribution we see is not that different. But what's really interesting is, and just want to again, it's a real problem, ongoing problem, particularly for Eastern Europe, with high level of injecting and a high proportion of people living there, giving a high numbers of people with HIV/AIDS in Eastern Europe. Trends in drug treatment, we see over the last decade. Trends actually differ quite significantly from region to region. For instance, we see in Latin America a decline in cocaine and increase in other drugs. We see in North America the increase in the opioids. We see in Western and Central Europe a decline in the opioids, but an increase in cannabis. In Africa, it's the highest level of cannabis, but actually is declining, while we have seen there over the last decade an increase in opioids and so on. So it's really different from different regions. Over the last, just the 2021 data, at the global level, the most problematic, as Chloe mentioned before, are the opioids, 38% of the global level, followed by almost at the same level, cannabis and ATS, 70%, and then cocaine, 9%. In terms of when we take at the number of countries where the problem is, it's still opioids number one. Then is number two is cannabis, and then comes the amphetamine type stimulants. In terms of the number of countries which report as the primary drug, a specific drug. And when it comes to the same question regards to death, the dominance of opiates is even bigger. You see the large parts of the people who actually die from opiates. This is then followed by cocaine and sedatives and tranquilizers. In terms of the opiates market, now we look at the three markets. The big markets, opiates market, what we have seen here is the big production areas continue to be Afghanistan, Myanmar, and Mexico. But what is really interesting is the transit. And transit, okay, in Europe and along the Balkan route, this has been there for ages. It's nothing new. But what you really see is about Eastern Africa. All around the coast of Eastern Africa, they are and have emerged as transit countries for heroin over the last few years. The same applies to some countries in Western Africa. So this is something new over the last couple of years. In terms of the final destination countries, as usual, we have destinations in Europe, destinations in the Americas. Again, this is nothing new as such. I think more of the transit countries, which in Africa, this is something to watch out, because this is something which could be eventually, when there's transit, there's always a problem that there could be some local consumption also arising. In terms of opium production, we already said there was the increase in the area under cultivation in 2022, but actually a small decline in the opium production. This was because of weather conditions in Afghanistan. All of this will change substantially in 2023. So we suspect, or it's likely, that there could be a decline in Afghanistan in the opium production, and that's at the global level, because Afghanistan was responsible for 80% of the global opium production in 2022. Now, in terms of distribution, most of is seized of the heroin and morphine is being seized in Asia, 69%, and here it's in the Middle East, Southwest Asia, almost half, 52%. What's also quite clear is Europe is a far bigger heroin market than the Americas. 23% of the global is seized in Europe, and in Americas is 4%. In terms of the trafficking, the most significant trafficking flows continue to be from Afghanistan along the Balkan route, the various ways of the Balkan route, towards Western and Central Europe. But we also see the ongoing trafficking from Myanmar to other parts in East Asia and Oceania, and from Mexico to the United States. So we really have three parallel markets, largely independent markets. So we supplying the opiates. And now, if there is, and there could be, decline in Afghanistan next year, it is mostly affecting the countries next to Afghanistan and the countries towards Europe because of this decline. Now, in terms of the distribution of the seizures, we see more than 80%, close to 90% of the seizures are related to Afghan opiates. The bulk is the Balkan route, but we also see quite importance in the southern route, while the Americas and East and Southeast Asia has been rather stable over the last few years, so no major changes over there. In terms of individual countries, we see Afghanistan fluctuations. In 2022-21 actually a decline, but an increase in other parts of Asia, particularly in South Asia. For Europe, it was just the opposite. We had a decline in 2020 when there was the COVID, and again increase in 2021. There was again expanding market. The same in Africa, expanding Africa, seizures, but also the market there because of transit increased. In the Americas, in contrast, ongoing decline. In terms of the global opiates, we see, yes, they have been changing, but the real dynamics has been in synthetic opioids, in the pharmaceutical opioids. They have shown the largest increase in 2021. And what are the important here? So we have here codeine. Codeine is number one. We have then tramadol, but also then the fentanyl, and a large number which is non-defined, but some of it also could be tramadol. In terms of the countries, the regions, here in the synthetic and the pharmaceutical opioids, we see it's Africa and Asia, the dominating ones. Over the last 5 years, Africa 50%, Asia 46%, and only comes afterwards the Americas and Europe. In terms of the substances, the biggest have been over the last 5 years, codeine, followed by tramadol, and then fentanyl. And again, this could be misleading because when we convert it into STDs, into the estimates of the so in doses estimates, then we see actually the biggest is fentanyl, then followed by codeine and tramadol out of all these substances. Now, in terms of the substances, more than 99% of the seizures of the fentanyl in 2021 took place in North America, and then comes Europe, only small amounts, and afterwards Oceania. In terms of the codeine, we see significant investment in Central Africa and South Asia, and to a lesser extent East and Southeast Asia. And when it comes to tramadol, it's really West and Central Africa, 97% of global seizures there, followed by South Asia. So it's quite a distinct markets, the fentanyl, the codeine, and the tramadol. As Chloe mentioned before, what we really have seen was this dramatic increase of opioid deaths in the United States. And this has really been prompted by the deaths related to fentanyl. Now, in terms of the pharmaceutical medical consumption of opioids, what we see has been a decline in the biggest markets. Also, Chloe mentioned this before. We see a decline in North America, a decline in Europe, Western Central Europe, a decline in Australia and in New Zealand. This is actually good news because we had some overproduction there, overconsumption there. On the other side, we see the clear increase in the other low-income countries, an increase of almost 50% over the last 2015 to 2021 period. And here the increase has been particularly in the Near and Middle East, but also Eastern and Southeastern Europe, South America. So there's an increase. Also from low levels, we see an increase in South Asia. In Africa, it's still extremely low level and no changes. And also in the Oceania, except Australia and New Zealand, levels are extremely low. So having said this, the overall positive sign of an increase, because there's clearly not enough supply of these very important pharmaceutical opioids in most developing countries. And this is very positive that there's increase, and it's still not enough, far not enough, because also people have pain in these countries, not only the United States and not only Europe. They also have pain, they have a cancer, and they would definitely need more, but at least the trend is going into, in most regions, into the right direction. In terms of, having said this, still this map shows you the distribution. And you see the distribution of the consumption, the medical consumption. It's high in the United States. It's still rather high in Canada and in parts of Europe. But in most of Africa, it's extremely low, and in most of Asia, it's extremely low. And in these levels in those areas clearly need to be increased. There needs to be more medical supply of these opiates available. And I think the NGOs can play a big role. And I think also these maps can help to strengthen the arguments. These opiates must be made available for people who suffer, who have pain, to have them available and to get the opiates they need for pain management. There have been some good news over the last 2 decades. The buprenorphine and methadone, which are used in substitution treatment, have actually increasing, quite significantly increasing. And so the overall trend has been here actually going into the right direction. Cocaine market. In terms of the cocaine market, what we see is there's been really a massive increase over the last 2 years. Not only in terms of area cultivation, but also in terms of production. In terms of cocaine use, the biggest markets is North America and South America, and then Western and Central Europe. But we also see many markets emerging in other parts of the world. In terms of the cocaine trafficking, the biggest market trafficking is from the Andean countries towards Central America and then North America, as well as towards Europe. But you also have emerging here what we really see, but interesting, we see for the first time or for the second time in a row, we see actually diseases in Western Central Europe being slightly higher than those of North America. It always in the past, it was the opposite. Now, it's just an indication of how big and quickly the European market, particularly the West European market, is developing. Still, the biggest issues take place in Colombia, United States, and then Ecuador. In Europe, the biggest were Belgium, Netherlands, then Spain, and then France and Germany. In terms of the alternative trafficking routes, Chloe was mentioning it, we have seen trafficking through Brazil and then towards Africa or directly from there to Europe. We see there's a lot of trafficking towards Africa and from Africa onwards to Europe. And this is, of course, a problem for Africa, because when you have a lot of trafficking, there is a theoretical threat of a spillover. And Africa is really being threatened by this potential spillover which might take place. Now we have also, Chloe mentioned this, in Southern Europe, we have trafficking here, which is rather new, which didn't exist before. There were some good indicators in 2020 because of the COVID. We see all for Europe, the actual indicators, these are a decline in the European market. Then we have here the wastewater, and the wastewater clearly shows, yes, there was a decline in 2020, but from onwards, 21 and 22, a real increase again. So the cocaine market is really, it's it's going up, going up, going up massively. And this is here based on the wastewater data for Europe. Cocaine use in North America, it's less clear. It seems to be a rather declining market, but the indicators don't show a clear picture, not a clear picture as they show for Europe. They would show a clear picture when you come to death, but again, it's not clear because many of the deaths related to cocaine are in fact related to fentanyl. So people use cocaine, and this cocaine is then laced with fentanyl, and people die. So it's difficult to say, did they die of the fentanyl, did they die of the cocaine? They died of a combination of fentanyl and cocaine, and this has been the one which has been increasing. Cocaine by itself has been rather stable over the last 3 years. Last, amphetamine type stimulants, here massive increases here in terms of seizures. Clearly the biggest are the methamphetamine, but also amphetamine is increasing. You see the massive increase over the last 2 decades. Also, the seizures, the increase was much more in these synthetic drugs, in these amphetamine type stimulants, than in cocaine, than in amphetamine, or than in cannabis. So it really has been exploding. Also, for the first time, we looked at the precursors, and there's something interesting that for most of the world, you still have ephedrine, pseudoephedrine for producing the methamphetamine. However, for Mexico, we have the P2P. P2P is the main substance there, or it's precursors which you produce out of P2P. Then you have a lot of precursors overseas in China, but also here it's mostly ephedrine, but also a large proportions of P2P precursors. For Europe, it's a little more complicated because you have the P2P precursors, but they are still mostly used for amphetamine production and only partly, like in Holland or Belgium, for the methamphetamine production. In terms of the methamphetamine seizures, the 2 markets, the biggest markets remain North America and East and Southeast Asia. We have seen massive increase over the last decade, but now for these big markets, we see a stabilization. The increase has been in the non-traditional markets. Though, and Chloe showed you before the slides, those are the ones which are really exploding, which are really going high, and this is where the attention should be. In terms of the market, methamphetamine is still a local market. Most of the production takes place in the region, and is sold within the region. Inter-regional trafficking is still rather small. It does exist, but it's not the majority. Last one is the amphetamine. For the amphetamine, we see a real concentration in the Near Middle East and Southwest Asia, 59% of the seizures, followed by Europe, 24%. Over the last 2 years, there's been a massive increase here, particularly in East and Near Middle East, Southwest Asia. Bigger seizures took place in the last 3 years in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, but also in 1 year, like in Italy, because there were seizures going, trafficking going from the Levante to Italy, and then should have gone back to Saudi Arabia. In terms of the distribution of the captagon, we see 75% is in the Middle East, so that's really dominating one. But also we have some in Southeastern Europe, where it very often goes in small amounts also to other parts, North Africa, and Chloe mentioned also even we see across Africa also emerging. I'm staying with this, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Thomas, for a great addition to Chloe's part of the report. And not to spend so much time, I would like to give the floor to civil society representatives. So first, I would like to introduce Professor John Tombereau from Australia, representing the Garner Institute. John, it's nice to have you here. Please, the floor or the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. And look, I wanted to say firstly, what a marvelous body of work we've just heard. That is a really terrific achievement to be able to harness all of that information. So I'm talking here in the middle of the night in Australia, and it's a great privilege. What I'll do is I will share some slides just to help me lead my way through the presentation today. So let me do that. And you can see here that I'm based at a university. So I'm a professor and chair in health psychology at Deakin University here in Australia. And our civil society leader here is the Delgado Institute. What I'm going to talk about is stepping off from what we've heard today. So today we've really heard of rising trends in people using drugs, and that we do need to think about the solutions. I'm going to talk a bit today about how we can integrate our prevention response, and so that we can also align it with drug treatment. And that's the topic that I wanted to address today. So really talking very much about solutions. I'm going to talk a bit about Australia, so I apologise that this might seem very much Australian-centred, but I think we've got a good message here about the way this could be of some value to the rest of the world. So if we look at Australia, until 2009, we had our focus on prevention was very much on harm reduction. So my teams did quite a lot of research around this, and what we were able to establish is that those messages were going a little astray. We found that it was really through bringing in more abstinence-based programs and policies that related to trying to send a clearer message to school-age children, that we were then able to have some effective reduction in alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use. So, however, in Australia, our overall treatment platforms, as different to prevention, very much focus on harm reduction still. And we're finding that they're poorly integrated, in many cases, with abstinence-based prevention and recovery programs that have increasing evidence for enhancing human development. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Here's some overheads that show a trend for no use and how that has actually become more of a popular way of behaving between 2002 and 2017. You can see here for tobacco is really the outstanding achievement. And again, we should all remember that there has been very effective tobacco prevention that has happened in many countries. Australia has a very proud record, but also we've had quite good success. It's not as good as some countries such as America, who led the way in seeing reductions in school-age alcohol use. You can see that it was actually very low rates of non-use in 2002, and it increased to about a third of the school-age populations not using, and that's continued to improve through deliberate prevention efforts. And we can see too here that cannabis, we had more non-users through to 2008. It's fallen away somewhat, but and we need to do more work on that. And so the message here is that prevention is possible. On an abstinence message, we believe we can achieve much more. So there is arguments that the reduction in school-age substance use that we've seen here in these overheads was an international trend. It has been in recent times. The point I want to make is that we really had quite good success in Australia. You can see in 2011, we really were starting to see advances here at a time that Europe and the United Kingdom were not making the same advances. We were following a model that the United States had followed in the 1980s. And this model can be repeated around the world, which is very much the focus on abstinence. For cigarettes, we do very well in Australia. And you can see here that in relative terms, we've done very well with illicit drugs by 2011. These figures for alcohol have continued to drop. And in other countries as well, we've now seen drops as they've brought in policies to more assertively deal with these substances. And so that's very good news. It means prevention is possible. In Australia, we have seen that we can actually have studies. You can see this one here in 2018. You can read this report in Drug and Alcohol Review, where we can actually explain the things that you need to change if you want to see reductions in school-age alcohol use. So really, this is about reducing availability, policies that can reduce sales and availability, and also changing practices around families. So you need to change social norms. And this is something we've learned very strongly as part of the success that we've experienced here. So how can we improve the integration of these effective abstinence-based programs so that they also marry to prevention? Well, here we've seen that we do know that the harm reduction practices we had in Australia into 2002 were actually very different when we compared to school policies in the United States. And we, as I said, that introducing these effective abstinence-based programs have been very helpful. And so they are needing to use evidence-based health promotion. And what I'm not advocating is zero tolerance approaches. I don't believe it's necessary to have school exclusion or criminal penalties to have the benefits of these very strong prevention approaches. So can we further strengthen successful prevention efforts? The answer is yes. If we improve the community integration of these abstinence-based prevention with treatment and recovery, and these are models increasingly that we're seeing have very good results. So if we look at some of the current trends, as I say, we've enjoyed very good success in tobacco prevention, but in efforts to reduce some of the harms of tobacco, there have been enthusiasts, and I know a lot of people in tobacco control have very good arguments for supporting the idea of e-cigarettes, where we have seen some people who found it very hard to quit tobacco were successful in quitting using these. In Australia, we saw then a rise. It was quite a very clear rise in the use of e-cigarettes or vaping amongst youth that had not used substances before. And it worried our government to the point that they've actually banned these practices. And now, in order to try to protect those who are trying to use them to quit cigarettes, you need a medical referral to use them, which is an attempt to try to balance some of these issues. So the issue here is that we need to be careful where harm reduction attempts start to get in the way of our efforts to have a generational change towards abstinence. With alcohol, increasingly nations are realizing that very strong guidelines are needed because there does not appear to be safe doses of alcohol. And so the abstinence message took hold in Australia. First time we had those recommended guidelines was 2009. Increasingly, nations are taking up the idea that they should be recommending no alcohol use because of the effects of cancer. And so slowly but sure, this is a message that we've got to support. It's very important. For cannabis, we know we're heading in the wrong direction. We've heard in our report today that we have rising rates of use. And again, this has brought in from the idea that there's a medical benefit, which is we know has not been proven. And so we need to again come back to the problem we've got here, where this is being promoted as safe practice when it is not. And we know that there's great harms associated with the disorders that are rising, but also cancers and birth defects that are rising in the nations that are liberalising here. We've heard it today of the issues to do with pain medications, with opioids. And again, here we need to be very cautious about the sorts of messages, but we also have heard today the need for a balanced approach where medicines are proven and safely regulated, then they are, we should be advocating for them. So I thank you for this chance to provide a commentary very strongly suggesting that prevention is possible and can even be further improved and strengthened. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Maybe just as an idea to UNODC to include maybe some prevention-related indicators to the World Drug Report. So to put prevention maybe higher on the agenda also in relation to the report. Okay, so let's proceed with the next Civil Society speaker, Rebecca. It's also great to have you here with us. And Rebecca is from Youth Rights and from Brazil, and she will cover a completely different topic. So Rebecca, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will refrain from using a slide presentation. I will instead just be speaking here and with the audience today. Let me start by thanking for the opportunity of being here to speak with you today. I'm, as I was said, representing Youth Rights, which is a youth-led network that aims to elevate and amplify the voices of young people who use drugs and that are affected by drug policies worldwide. So we advocate for evidence-based approaches that are based on full spectrum harm reduction. And I would like to remind that the goal of harm reduction is more focused on promoting the well-being of people who use drugs and promote health outcomes for these people rather than reducing drug use. So I would like to start by commending UNODC for including contemporary drug issues in the World Drug Report 2023, particularly the chapter that focuses on the environmental impacts of the drug trafficking in the Amazon basin. This topic had already been explored in previous research conducted by civil society and NGOs, for example, Transform Drugs, the Transnational Institute, the Open Society Foundations, the Washington Office on Latin America, just to name a few. And I would like to say that it's encouraging to see the debate gaining more prominence inside of the United Nations. Going forward, I think it is important to acknowledge and reflect on how the security policies that are used to respond to drug trafficking activities are also bringing side effects to the local communities and the environments in which they live. For instance, the report briefly mentions on page 67 the impacts of forcibly eradicating illegal crops, being that through both manual eradication or aerospraying of chemical substances. The report acknowledges the negative effects of the practice on the environment, on the health of local communities, and on population displacement. It also mentions the inefficiency of such policies in reducing illegal crops. So we encourage this topic to be further explored in future publications. Indeed, a phenomenon that deserves to be explored is how the current punitive drug policy approach have fueled the so-called balloon effect, which is a term used to describe the process by which drug production is displaced across national borders in order to evade eradication efforts. And we have seen this, for example, happening in Colombia and Peru. It is important to note that the local criminal trend that we have in the Amazon basin is also in part the result of security responses to criminal networks. For example, Primeiro Comando da Capital and Comando Vermelho, the current leading drug trafficking groups in the region, have expanded their activities from São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro to the Amazon basin after Brazilian authorities moved their leaderships to the federal prison system in Manaus. So such a move allowed for the establishment of alliances and fostered the expansion of innovation and transnational crime, bringing along increased levels of violence and bloodshed, as it is acknowledged on the report on page 90. The strengthening of gangs after zero tolerance security policies is a phenomenon that is observed across all Latin America. The report showed how violence levels are consistently rising in the region, and this is fueled by both illegal trade and punitive responses. Indeed, the report shows that cities in the Amazon basin have homicides rates per capita that are higher than national averages. A study published this year by the Institute of Applied Economic Research in Brazil estimated that each Brazilian has a 4.2-month reduction in their life expectancy due to the effects of the war on drugs. The sum of all lifetime lost amounts to 1.14 million a year. The same study also calculated that the country loses at least 50 billion reais, which amounts to roughly $210 million per year, as a result of the prohibition of drug use and repression of trafficking. So we must think about the long-term impact that living in such a violent context casts on youth. A recent study followed adolescents in Rio de Janeiro that were frequently exposed to violent clashes between drug trafficking groups and the military police. And the research found that 7.8% of these teenagers experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. So such an investigation could be expanded in the next World Drug Report. Studies have also shown that the current war on drugs contributes to the professionalization of crime, the overpopulation of prison system, and the spread of gang presence. It also leads to the escalation and banalization of violence while undermining peace possibilities. Numerous reports from the region point to an alarming number of youth and child involvement in drug-related activities. For instance, in Colombia, one of the most common ways in which children are involved in the drug trade is through farming illicit crops. In Mexico, children have been frequently employed as sicaritos, or child assassins, to carry out hits and torture for drug cartels. Minors are frequently recruited because young people are valuable assets for criminal groups. They represent a cheaper source of manpower and are easier to manipulate, especially if they're applied with narcotics. And indeed, this is a common tactic, as it was evidenced by numerous accounts of young recruits that were acting under the influence of drugs. Such practices are enabled via a complex interplay of factors that are almost always linked to child survival. Research carried out by the NGO Observatório de Favelas in 2018 investigated the profile of the children and adolescents who are cooptated by drug trafficking groups in Rio. With an average of 12 years old, most of them start with the intention of earning income to support the family. Economic and social factors should be addressed, including basic infrastructure and market access. A number of alternative development programs relating to illicit crop production provide important lessons for policymakers, and we encourage such lessons to be further explored in future publications of the World Drug Report. The war on drugs curbs the access of local communities to life-saving services, such as harm reduction. It also fosters the cooptation of minors by drug trafficking groups, which may lead to early use of narcotics. Moreover, it pollutes ecosystems with harmful chemicals that can result in long-term health complications. Ensuring the well-being of future generations in the Amazon basin means investing less in security weaponry and more in health, education, and employment opportunities for communities, particularly for young people. This year's report mentions how drug challenges are linked to human rights violations, which was briefly mentioned on page 13. In the future, we encourage the inclusion of a chapter that further discusses the connection between drug challenges, control strategies, and human rights. We commend the report focus on the rights and security of indigenous communities, which are especially impacted. We appreciate the inclusion of new indicators and topics in this year's analysis, as well as the development of new online tools for interacting with the wealth of evidence that was gathered. We would also like to encourage UNODC and government authorities to collaborate with existing civil society efforts for collecting further data that enables analyzing areas of knowledge that remain under-investigated, such as the needs of young people who use drugs, for example. We would like to invite all the participants here today to attend the launching of the youth response to this report, which was developed by Paradigma, a coalition of youth-led organizations from across the globe, and we will include more information about it in the chat. So I would like to conclude by reminding policymakers that the responses to tackle the challenges listed in this report should not solely rely on security-led approaches. With 2030 closer on the horizon, policies that keep the sustainable development goals in sight must involve all affected communities and center around promoting the well-being of all people in the long term. Evidence-based drug policy starts with good evidence and it ends with policy reform. This report is a first step to informing innovative policies that can shift the current punitive approach and contribute to shaping a positive future for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for highlighting another very important issues, not just for UNODC and for authorities, but also for us as civil society organizations. So we still have some time for some questions. So there were many questions submitted in the Q&A section of Zoom. So definitely we don't have enough time to go through all of them, but we will do our best to get answers, at least to most of them, in writing, if it won't be possible to get answers here during the webinar. So let's start with the first questions. There is a question by Daryl about stigmatizing people who use drugs, but without including people using alcohol and tobacco and prescription drugs as well. So I think this is everybody here would be happy to have some comparison information or data on alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs as well. So Maybe there are some information in the World Drug Report as well, comparing also some information with alcohol and tobacco. So, but I think this is not the mission of UNODC, as far as I understand. Maybe in the future, different agencies could join forces and bring some comparative data, comparing alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs together. So just maybe as an idea for the future. But there is also a question by Eilish. Does the chapter on the Amazon basin also analyze the impact of widespread and indiscriminate use of chemicals to destroy illicit crops? So this might be a question for Chloe and Thomas. So there is also some information available about using chemicals to destroy illicit crops. Chloe.
Yes, thank you, Matej. Yes, there is a box in the Amazon chapter which is quite extensive, and we have done a specific calculation based on data from Colombia, based on the method of production of cocaine in Colombia, because they are not the same everywhere. But okay, based on this one, we have estimated how much of different chemical inputs are needed, including gasoline, and how much end up polluting the environment, basically. So this is there. And there is also an infographic about the type of pollution also. So this is one thing. Then what was the question? Yes, about that. About the comparison with alcohol or tobacco. No, we don't do that in a systematic way. But this year there is a chapter on substance use in humanitarian settings, and it's substance use. So it's not only drug use. There is also, I mean, it's little, but still, there is some data on alcohol there. And then last year, in the World Report of last year, we had in the special points of interest, which is the sort of leaflet that they distributed separately, but it's also in booklet 1, the exif summary. We compared also the death, I think the death, but not only the death.
Yes.
I had to check between alcohol, tobacco, and non-medical use of controlled drugs.
I'm asking, can you?
Thomas want to add?
This one, I think it's this one, yeah.
Yes. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
this is from last year.
From last year, and there we could really see that there are far more people dying from tobacco, far more people dying from alcohol than the people dying from drugs. The drug use accounts for 5% of all substance-related deaths. So if you add alcohol, tobacco, and drugs account for 5%. However, when you use the healthy life years lost due to disability and drug-induced deaths, then you see it's still tobacco. Then tobacco is number 1, followed by alcohol, and number 4 is drugs. But drugs account then for 9%, so almost twice as high as a percentage. And this is the reason, because people who die from drugs normally die at a younger age than people who die from tobacco or from alcohol. And so you use more years, and that's the share in the total almost doubled from 5% to 9%. So we have analyzed it, but this is from last year's report, not from this year's report.
Okay, might be a good idea to continue with these comparisons, because people are continuously interested to get this data also from other substances. So just a suggestion. Okay, then I think it's also nice, great question. What is the best way to involve women in prevention and also engage women to help increase treatment of women? So this is more gender related issue, but not maybe just for UNODC, also for us as service providers in treatment and prevention. It would be great to discuss this issue in further in more details at some future events. So maybe some ideas from UNODC about this topic?
We have developed some guidelines about standards in prevention, but also standards in treatment. Mm-hmm. And we have also some guidance material on gender sensitive services, drug services, and I think this is very important. Mm-hmm. This is not reflected in the WEDOC report because there are other reports and other guidance material. So I would refer you to that basically, and they're available on our website. Of course.
we can share also with our members those documents you mentioned, the guidelines and the standards.
Yeah, but women, I mean, the fact that women are underrepresented in treatment may come from different issues, and they may have more barriers than men to enter treatment for different reasons. I mean, of course, discrimination and stigma plays a major role, but there is also the fear of legal sanction, the fear of having the children to be to have the custody, to lose the custody of the children, the issue with the childcare. There are a lot of issues, which seems that during the COVID, when there was this this innovation in access to drug services, and especially the distance, the telemedicine, this allowed some groups that usually have less access to perhaps have more access. I said perhaps because it depends where. Yes.
Okay, I know there is some information already in the report about it, but there still is quite relevant question about military responses. So one of the effects measured in the report should be the consequences of the military responses and the argumentation of violence and how this has affected the research for the protection of the flora and fauna in specific contexts in Latin America. So any...
Well, I cannot offer anything, but I'm not sure I understood the question, to be honest. It seems that it's a program of research in itself, rather than for the WEDOC report, I would say.
Maybe just as a suggestion for the future analysis. Okay, so the question from Fatima is that how does one get the government to put hands on deck in order to eradicate the drugs abuse in the country? So this is probably more a question for the national authorities of each country, how to approach it. There are several evidence-based approaches how to do it. Maybe this is enough explained, not necessary to go to the details. And there is a question by Vitaly in Russian, so I just let me read the translation. So, am I right in thinking regulation causes concern? The existing black market is worrying. There are always risks, but they can be minimized and not worried. So it's about it was, I think, reported in a way that regulation in some cases could cause concern. That's how Vitaly understood. Any additional comments about it? So,
I guess that one thing I would say is that I think it is important for us to have evidence-based, as far as we can, regulation. So again, it's today when we've heard the drug report, we see the very the clear relationships that exist between those markets that set themselves up where they don't have, they purport to be medical. So we see that there's a proposal that these are medical cannabis, but there are actually no trials for many of those states that have allowed those practices. And so it's very hard to then set guidelines. And in that situation, if you don't have guidelines, I think people then are at sea, that they find themselves without really fully understanding the implications of the harms that can come from some of those substances. So I do think that we should be pursuing policies whereby we can that very much advocate where a substance is said to offer benefits or therapeutic benefits, that we have a system in place by which they can be trialed and then established as to whether or not there is a dose that may have some benefit. So I think we face a situation where that is the ideal, and it should be, again, from my argument, I do think that we should be trying to encourage evidence-based practices. So again, prevention can work, and where we do prevent, that involves evidence-based efforts to regulate. And I think this is where we need to be very much emphasising. Obviously, prevention is better than cure, and so getting that right is I think a very important part. So I would like to see that the drug report focus and integrate somewhat more with these areas where we are seeing successes, and to again emphasise those areas where it's possible for us to expand those successes. And I think this is very important.
So you mean to report about positive evidence-based policies in place in different countries? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and the way in which they've had that they may be. I mean, I think that this is an important part of our efforts to achieve successes in drug policy. That we do see that there are some of the policies and practices. I mean, I understand that this is a great chance for us to compare cross-nationally in the situation and it's a very dynamic situation. The report team are to be congratulated because they capture that. But I do think that it is good to bring in under the umbrella those examples where the policies and regulations are working well, and to celebrate those as well as some of the challenges that we face. So I think that would be my suggestion for advancing our situation.
Okay, thank you, John, very much for your comments. And we are also approaching the end of the webinar. We are already late for 2 minutes. So as I said already before we start with questions and answers, we will do our best to get answers also in writing by us or by UNODC. So keep us reminded if you don't get the answer to your question, so you can also send us an email with the question. So to conclude this great webinar, very informative, very valuable for civil society organizations, I must say that unfortunately in many areas of drug policy, the situation has not improved or is even worse in recent years compared to previous decades. So I believe that the situation is not as unpromising as it may seem from the report, and that there are many positive evidence-based and effective policies and practices in the world in the field of prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and recovery that should be highlighted in such reports as well. So it may be worth considering to systematically include such information and research data in the following report. And I believe that the report would sound differently with at least some added hope for a better future. And civil society organizations, together with member states, academia, private sector, and UN agencies, can contribute a lot to this kind of data and research. So my idea is actually to make this report a little bit more positive, to give a little bit more hope, because we know from our experience and our practice that there are some very positive policies and practices in place, which should be discussed about as well. So thank you very much for participation. Most of people stayed with us until the end. And thank you again, UNODC, for co-organizing this event. And let's do it next year again. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for civil society participants and speakers as well. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.